Hey guys. Tonight, we slip back to a time when the sea wasn't a vacation spot, it was a battlefield. You stand barefoot on the creaking deck of a Byzantine warship, sails taut against the Mediterranean wind. As the sun sinks, blood orange behind Carthage, somewhere ahead, smoke curls upward, somewhere behind. A man named Flavius Basiliscus adjusts his robes and pretends not to hear the screams. Yeah, you're on the losing side of one of the worst planned naval disasters of late antiquity, and you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Feel free to drop your location and what time you're tuning in. I'm always curious if you're drifting off to dreams in Kentucky or Cairo. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the smell of pitch and burning pine. The deck beneath you groans. Its seams straining like overcooked bread crust. All around, a fleet of Byzantine ships is coming apart in slow motion. Their black hulls listing, sails in ribbons, and men screaming prayers to gods who clearly skipped this shift. It's 468 CE, and what was supposed to be the crowning naval achievement of the Eastern Roman Empire has instead turned into a maritime funeral pyre. At the center of it all stands Basiliscus, a man whose name you'll forget if you blink too hard, but who, for a brief moment, held the fate of an empire in his sweaty hands. And let's be honest, he dropped it. But rewind a few hours. Let's slow down. This wasn't just a random disaster. The Byzantine Empire, under Emperor Leo Point, had planned this campaign meticulously, or so they thought. The Vandal Kingdom, in North Africa, ruled by the annoyingly clever King Gaiseric, had become a major thorn in Constantinople's side. Pirates, raids, and the sacking of Rome in 455 still stung like a paper cut dipped in vinegar. Enough was enough. The empire would strike back. Enter Basiliscus' brother-in-law to Emperor Leo, inexperienced in actual warfare, but gifted in the art of being related to the right people. He's handed command of one of the largest fleets the Eastern Roman Empire ever launched, depending on which ancient source you half trust before dozing off. There were anywhere from 100 to 100 ships, and upwards of 100 men. Imagine the bureaucracy. Now imagine trying to keep it all afloat. As the fleet approaches the coast of modern-day Tunisia, nerves ripple through the ranks. You pace the deck, watching the horizon. Gaiseric knows you're coming. Everyone does. Subtlety wasn't really this fleet's thing. Basiliscus, instead of launching an immediate strike while the Vandals are still tying their sandals, agrees to a 5-day truce requested by Gaiseric. Why historians still argue whether it was political maneuvering, religious posturing, or just plain idiocy. You suspect it's the third, because 5 days is just enough time for the Vandals to ready their secret weapon fire ships. Old, expendable boats packed with flammable materials, set alight, and aimed like suicidal torches into the heart of the Byzantine Armada. And when the truce expires, that's exactly what happens. The Mediterranean, usually such a postcard, becomes an inferno. Flaming hulls slam into unsuspecting vessels. Men leap into the sea, only to burn on the surface or drown beneath it. You, clutching a rope with blistered hands, try to decide whether dying by fire or by fish seems worse. And where's Basiliscus, Oh, he's on a fast ship, sailing hard in the opposite direction. The admiral flees, abandoning his massive fleet and the hopeless chaos behind. Not exactly the Braveheart type. One joke that survives through history is that Basiliscus was the only man to launch a bigger disaster than the fire of Rome and managed to survive it. As dawn breaks, what's left of the fleet limps back east. You float among debris, passing shattered masts and scorched helmets. The once glorious campaign ends in muttered curses and a head count that no one wants to finish. Tens of thousands lost, hundreds of ships gone. Basiliscus returns to Constantinople, not in triumph, but trailing shame like an anchor. And yet somehow he isn't executed. You don't get it. You really don't. Maybe it's because he's family. Maybe Leo just doesn't want more blood on the palace floors. Or maybe Basiliscus is better at palace politics than he is at basic navigation. Instead of a trial, Basiliscus slinks into exile in a church, claiming sanctuary, surrounded by icons and incense, hoping nobody notices that the man who lost half the imperial fleet is now hiding behind a crucifix. And here you are, barely dry, wondering how anyone this incompetent could end up in charge of a war and then, later, an entire empire. Oh yes, he'll be emperor. We're just getting started. But first, we need to understand how Basiliscus got anywhere near this mess in the first place. And that story starts not with naval strategy, but with in-laws, the deadliest force in the ancient world. You're squinting through candlelight in a smoky palace corridor, the air thick with incense and whispers. In the Byzantine Empire, advancement doesn't always come through heroism or competence. It often slithers in through marriage. And Basiliscus, he rides in on his sister's coattails. Verina is her name, and she's no meek palace ornament. She's married to Emperor Leo I, and she knows how to pull strings so well. She practically plays the imperial court like a harp. You're not entirely sure what Verina sees in her brother. Maybe loyalty, maybe usefulness, or maybe he just does what she tells him. Either way, thanks to her influence, Basiliscus rises faster than a sponge in bath water. Despite his catastrophe off the coast of Carthage, he stays oddly tethered to power, orbiting the imperial court like a flea-ridden comet. But it's not just about family ties. The empire is groaning under the weight of factionalism, court rivalries, and a chronic shortage of men who can simultaneously hold a sword and a sentence. Basiliscus is ambitious. Yes, he's also slippery, politically shrewd, and apparently made of Teflon disasters slide right off him. And so, after a few years in purgatory, licking his wounds and dodging assassins, Basiliscus slithers back into the picture. Leo I, dies in 474. But before his corpse has even cooled, the Byzantine court is already playing a highly caffeinated game of musical thrones. Leo had one daughter, Ariadne, and she's married to a general named Zeno. That should make things simple. But this is Byzantium. Nothing is simple here. Zeno becomes emperor, not because people love him, mind you, but because nobody can agree on anyone else. He's Isaurian, born in a rugged, mountainous region in Asia Minor, and the snobs of Constantinople treat him like a barbarian in a bathrobe. Imagine electing a guy from the sticks, and then acting shocked when he eats grapes with his hands. Verina, Basiliscus' sister, loathes Zeno. She doesn't trust him, and she wants her own family line on the throne. Cue the scheming. And oh, the scheming is juicy. The plot kicks off with a classic bait and switch. Verena teams up with a rogues gallery of nobles, clergy, and guards. There's Ilus and Trocundes, two ambitious generals. There's the influential patriarch Acacius, who's always suspiciously close to incense smoke. There's even Zeno's own mother-in-law. If Netflix existed, this would be a limited series with 12 episodes and lots of dramatic close-ups. Together, they drive Zeno from Constantinople. The emperor flees in the dead of night, in the 4th of January 75. Allegedly dressing as a servant, he hightails it back to Isauria, and you can just imagine the palace maids laughing themselves silly after finding out who just borrowed their clothes. With the throne wide open, Basiliscus makes his move. You stand in the middle of the great palace as he's crowned emperor. It's surreal. Just a few years ago, he was hiding in a church, probably bribing monks with leftover campaign medals. Now, he's draped in imperial purple, clutching the cross and sneering at the very court that once wanted him dead. Historians still argue whether Basiliscus actually believed he was the best man for the job, or if he just saw a crown-shaped vacuum and leapt. Either way, he's not content with power. He wants legacy, respect, redemption. But here's the thing about legacies. They're easier to imagine than maintain. From day one, Basiliscus is already setting fire to goodwill faster than he did that fleet. He raises taxes to unbearable heights. That might be forgivable. Byzantine emperors weren't known for economic mercy, but he also sticks his foot straight into a theological bear trap. Welcome to the Monophysite controversy. Don't worry, you don't need a theology degree. You just need to know this. The empire is torn between two camps. One believes Jesus has two natures, divine and human. The other believes he has only one, divine. If you think this sounds like something you'd debate during a sleepover, well, congratulations. You're already more reasonable than most 5th century bishops. Basiliscus backs the Monophysite side. Hard. He issues an edict condemning the Council of Chalcedon, which had affirmed the two natures view. Problem is, the capital leans the other way, the people furious, the clergy hissing like teapots. Even his sister Verena starts to distance herself. And you, poor bystander, are just trying not to get trampled during the theological riots. It's a mess. Streets fill with angry mobs. Sermons turn into battle cries. And more than one monk throws a sandal at an imperial icon, Basiliscus. Instead of smoothing things over, doubles down. He forces church leaders to sign documents under duress. Even Acacius, the powerful patriarch of Constantinople, joins the resistance. You might remember him. He was on Team Basiliscus just 5 minutes ago, and so the new emperor finds himself increasingly isolated, propped up by fear rather than support. The throne may be gold, but it's surrounded by quicksand, and through it all, there's a low rumble from the east. Zeno is gathering forces. You can hear it even now. In the quiet corridors of the palace, the sound of swords being sharpened in the mountains, the sound of loyalty shifting like loose floorboards, and the whisper of a reckoning on the horizon. Because if Basiliscus thought naval flames were the worst thing he'd ever see, well, he clearly hasn't spent enough time around palace intrigue. You're pacing the colonnades of Constantinople as the city simmers like a stew left too long on the fire. The basilicas echo with sermons half theological, half revolutionary, and in every marketplace, whispers of regret cling to Basiliscus's name like a bad smell. You don't need to be a prophet to see it. The empire is itching for a new change, even if it means dragging an old emperor out of exile. Zeno, that so-called barbarian, from the Isaurian mountains, is not just sitting in his sandals, twiddling his thumbs. No, he's been gathering an army. His loyalists are ready. His enemies in the capital are now Basiliscus's enemies, and his return feels less like a surprise twist and more like an overdue correction. And it's not just military might. Zeno knows the court, the church, and the people. He doesn't even need to march to the gates yet. His mere presence in the east sends tremors through the empire's wobbly foundation. The same bishops who toasted Basiliscus at his coronation are now mysteriously unavailable for dinner. Senators go silent. Spies sneak letters wrapped in bread loaves. Even Verena seems to be rethinking her family loyalty. But Basiliscus isn't done flailing. He tries to patch the rift with the church. Remember that Chalcedonian controversy well. Now he does too. He issues a new edict that basically says, "Just kidding, Chalcedon is great. Let's all be friends." It's a breathtaking about face. But by now, the crowd smells fear, even if the theology makes sense. The emperor's seesawing reeks of desperation, not conviction. One curious footnote here to issue his religious U-turn. Basiliscus co-signs the edict with his wife, Zenornis. Yes, he pulls his empress into the theological arena, and not gently. Historians still argue whether Zenonis was an actual Monophysite champion, or if Basiliscus just wanted someone else to take half the blame. Either way, the gesture backfires. Badly. It turns his support base into a bingo card of betrayal. As Zeno marches westward, cities start defecting like contestants on a reality show. No dramatic speeches, no sieges, just doors unlocked at midnight. Generals switching cloaks, and lots of well. We always liked Zeno anyway. It's the sort of collapse that doesn't even require battle horns. Just a little gravity, and everything slides downhill. Now imagine this. You're in the palace, and word comes that Zeno is approaching. Basiliscus panics. In one final Hail Mary, he sends out an envoy, Armatus. This guy's his nephew, a flashy general with great hair and questionable loyalty. Basiliscus gives him troops, coins, and probably a heartfelt speech like, "You're our only hope." Armatus rides out, but before you can say family betrayal, he's already cut a deal with Zeno. The price, a promise that he'll stay general of the army, and that his son will get a nice title. Not exactly high-stakes Game of Thrones material. But in Byzantium, a little nepotism goes a long way. With Armatus flipping sides, Basiliscus is basically toast. Zeno enters Constantinople with eerie ease in the 4th of August 76. There's no climactic battle, no Ziga, just a slow, inevitable shift. The kind of return that feels less like a conquest and more like gravity snapping back into place. Basiliscus flees to sanctuary again. You might be thinking, didn't we do this already? Yes. In fact, the Church of Saint S. Sophia is probably developing a wing just for disgraced emperors. This time, he hides with his family, clutching at altars and prayers like their political currency. Zeno, now firmly back on the throne, has a decision to make. In classic Byzantine fashion, he promises Basiliscus clemency. No blades, no poison, no nighttime stabbings. Just a little exile. That exile takes Basiliscus and his family to Cappadocia, a rocky, bleak region known more for monasteries than mercy. They're locked in a dry cistern, which sounds mildly unpleasant, until you realize it's a glorified stone pit with no food and no air circulation. There's no dramatic last stand, no final speech, just hunger, thirst, and silence. And so basiliscus dies, not in battle, not even by formal execution, just the slow, indifferent embrace of imperial neglect. You might expect a more dramatic send-off, but this is how the Byzantine world often handles its embarrassments, with quiet, dusty corners where history doesn't look too closely. Some accounts say they all starved to death. Others suggest exposure. A few later, chroniclers spin tales of divine punishment for his heresy, because apparently, even in death, you need a moral footnote. Historians still argue whether Zeno's leniency was real or performative, whether he truly meant to spare Basiliscus, or just arrange the kind of exile where forgetting to send food counts as plausible deniability. Back in Constantinople, life resumes its normal rhythm: scandals, sermons, senate drama. Basiliscus fades into the background. His name is scrubbed from monuments. His decrees are reversed, and all that remains of his reign is a cautionary tale. You pose now, looking up at the cathedral's gold dome, still glittering in the sun. For a moment, you remember the man who once stood beneath it in robes of purple, thinking he could command empires and bend theology to his will. You almost feel sorry for him. Almost. Then again, you also remember the ships, the fire, and the sheer audacity of his failures. You linger in the aftermath of Basiliscus's quiet, undignified demise, and the chill of that Cappadocian cistern hasn't entirely left your bones. But Constantinople doesn't pause to mourn its fallen. No, it clicks right back into place like a dislocated jaw, painful, but oddly routine. Zeno's back on the throne, polished and ready, wearing his best "I told you so" smile. You'd think the city would throw a week-long festival in his honor, but they're just relieved to have survived another round of imperial roulette. Zeno now rules not just with restored authority, but with a bitterness refined by betrayal. You notice it in his decrees, in his cautious reshuffling of the court, and in the way he keeps a closer eye on his so-called loyal generals, especially those who once toasted Basiliscus with a little too much wine. Even Armatus, that ever-so-helpful nephew who switched sides mid-march, gets the cold shoulder. Zeno rewards him, briefly, with lofty titles. But soon, well, Armatus has an unfortunate accident, the kind that involves swords. Historians still argue whether Zeno ordered it directly or just forgot to protect him. Either way, there's one less nephew to worry about. But don't get too comfortable, because while Zeno tightens the reins in Constantinople, storm clouds are swirling far beyond the imperial walls, ones even the Isaurian can't tame with bureaucracy. Let's head west. Imagine you're perched on a villa terrace in Ravenna, Italy, sipping watered wine and staring out at a Roman Empire that's looking less eternal and more endangered species. In fact, just as Zeno settles back into power, the western half of the empire quietly ends. Yes, in 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire gives up the ghost. No fiery collapse, no climactic battle, just a barbarian general named Odoacer tapping a boy emperor named Romulus Augustulus on the shoulder and saying, "That's enough of that." Romulus is deposed without much fuss. And Odoacer, he sends the imperial regalia east to Zeno with a note that essentially says, "You're the emperor now. I'm just managing Italy for you. Very tidy, very polite, and incredibly audacious. It's like mailing your landlord the keys after burning down half the house. Zeno doesn't quite know what to do with this arrangement. On paper, it makes him sole emperor of a united Roman Empire again. But in practice, Odoacer is now king in everything but name, and Zeno's authority, west of the Adriatic, is theoretical at best. Still, Zeno plays the long game. He acknowledges Odoacer, sort of, but with the reservation of a man pretending his dog understands Latin. It's diplomacy flavored with distrust, and it'll simmer for years. Back in the east, Zeno's Isaurian roots continue to stir resentment. The elite in Constantinople never truly embrace him. His accent is too thick, his friends too uncultured, his robes never quite pressed right, in hushed tones at banquets. They call his reign the Isaurian interlude, a polite way of saying they're waiting for someone better, and someone better, they think, might be lurking in the wings. Goilus, the general, if this were a play, Ilus would be that stern character in the background, with folded arms and impeccable armor. He's an Isaurian too, but with a flair for politics. At first, it props Zeno up, helping him regain the throne and crush enemies like Basiliscus. But power is a fickle mistress, and before long, Ilus decides he could do a better job than his old friend. In 484, Ilus backs a rebellion, but instead of taking the throne himself, he picks a curious candidate, Leontius, a scholarly, dignified man with some military credentials, and, more importantly, none of Zeno's baggage. The idea is to create an emperor, palatable to both the court and the troops, a kind of Zeno without the Isaurian. Leontius is proclaimed emperor in Tarsus. Coins are minted, bishops are consulted, speeches are made, and you, standing among the soldiers, you can feel the familiar rhythm flags, pledges, new purple robes stitched overnight, another round of imperial musical chairs. But here's the problem. Zeno may be unpopular, but he's not incompetent. He responds with fury and speed. The rebellion that was supposed to sweep across the east fizzles out like a soggy campfire. Ilus and Leontius are eventually cornered in a mountain fortress Papurius, where they hole up for a dramatic 2-year siege. 2 years. Think about that. It's enough time for babies to be born and learn to walk, for crops to fail and regrow, for rumors to rise and rot. Inside the fortress, Leontius and Ilus become almost mythical, living ghosts of a revolt no one remembers fondly. Finally, the siege ends, not with a bang, but with betrayal. A local informs on the rebels, and imperial troops pour in. Leontius is executed. Ilus, too. Their heads are sent to Zeno as trophies, boxed in irony and blood. Historians still argue whether Ilus ever intended to rule himself, or if Leontius was truly his preferred puppet. Some even whisper that the whole rebellion was designed to flush out other traitors, a political honeypot. Byzantine politics, after all, often make more sense upside down. You, meanwhile, are watching the horizon again. The empire has survived yet another round of revolts, with Zeno still clinging to power like a cat in a windstorm. His reign continues, turbulent and distrustful, filled with shifting alliances, secret bribes, and whispered threats. And through it all, the Eastern Roman Empire holds, bruised. Yes, paranoid, definitely, but still standing. For now, you're still standing on the edge of the empire, your boots dusty with the flakes of old rebellions, your eyes squinting westward, where Odoacer plays the part of loyal servant with a sword behind his back. But as the Eastern Roman Empire trudges forward, under Zeno's bruised but breathing rule, you can't help but sense the familiar tension rising again, because no one in Constantinople ever stays content for long. So let's shift our gaze. You're now pacing through the echoing halls of the great palace. The mosaics glitter like frozen lightning. The columns are as polished as Zeno's latest bribe. And behind every curtain, there's probably someone listening. That's just how things work here. The emperor's health is failing, his bouts of illness growing more frequent, his decisions more erratic. The court is abuzz. Everyone's calculating who'll rise next. Enter stage, left a certain Anastasius. Now, Anastasius isn't what you'd expect. He's not a general. He doesn't command legions or keep daggers in his sleeves. He's an administrator, a financial man, and gasp an actual monk at heart. Clean living, simple speech, eyebrows that allegedly met in the middle, like they were conspiring. Historians still argue whether this made him look wise or like he was constantly frowning at bad tax policies. Zeno, as it turns out, doesn't name him heir. Nope. He dies in 491 without doing that very useful thing, leaving a will. So naturally, chaos takes the wheel. Now you're in the hippodrome, pushed among thousands of shouting voices, all divided between two colors, the greens and the blues. It's not just about chariot racing. These factions are like political parties, Lokalgangs, and rowdy sports fans all rolled into one. And right now, they're screaming for influence over who'll wear the purple next. The Empress Ariadne, Zeno's widow, isn't interested in letting mob rule decide everything. She's still got game. And she picks Anastasius. The man's pious, respected, and not currently stabbing anyone. She even marries him to seal the deal. Because nothing says imperial endorsement, like tying the knot with the previous emperor's widow. This makes Anastasius not just ruler, but stepdad of the Eastern Empire. Adorable. You might think things would quiet down with a monkish bookkeeper on the throne. Think again. The Isaurians, Zeno's old loyalists, are livid. They'd tolerated Zeno's eccentricities because he was one of them. But now, this mild-mannered bureaucrat, with no Isaurian blood, is tossing them out of power. The new emperor, Anastasius, begins methodically removing them from positions of influence, like lint from his robes. And the Isaurians, they don't go quietly. They rise in full rebellion in 492. Imagine it, dusty warbands thundering out of the Taurus mountains, shouting for the glory of their dead emperor and for revenge on the city that replaced him with a taxman in sandals. What follows is the Isaurian War, a grueling, drawn-out civil conflict that drags across Asia Minor for 5 years. 5 years. That's longer than most emperors survive. You're stuck in the mud with soldiers who start to forget why they're even fighting. Supplies are erratic. Loyalties are paper-thin. And the city's caught in the middle. They close their gates, whisper their prayers, and hope not to be liberated too hard by either side. Eventually, Anastasius's generals wear the rebels down, not through flashy battles, but through attrition blockades, zegas, and a slow erosion of hope. The Isaurian leaders are captured, beheaded, and their heads sent back to Constantinople with all the grim ceremony of a bad Christmas present. Still, the war leaves scars. The Isaurians had once been kingmakers. Now, they're hunted, exiled, or simply erased from court life. You notice fewer Isaurian names in official documents, fewer thick accents echoing in the Senate. It's like the empire quietly presses delete. So what does Emperor Eyebrows do next? He does what he does. Best organize. Anastasius revamps the imperial finances with surgical precision. He standardizes taxes, streamlines the bureaucracy, and get this, abolishes the hated Chrysargyron, a tax so reviled that cities literally threw parties when it was repealed. You don't even like taxes, and you find yourself clapping. The result, the imperial treasury, begins to swell. Like, cartoonishly, gold pour sign, reserve pile up. By the time of his death, Anastasius will have left the empire with one of the healthiest budgets in its entire long, exhausting history. Of course, nothing in Byzantium is ever purely peaceful. Religious tensions bubble beneath the surface. Anastasius, leaning toward monophysitism, a belief that Christ has a single divine nature, starts rubbing the Orthodox establishment the wrong way. Riots erupt. Bishops throw tantrums. At one point, the hippodrome turns into a battlefield of theology, with citizens shouting doctrinal slogans instead of sports chants. Yes, that actually happened. Byzantium, where even your religion comes with bodyguards. Historians still argue whether Anastasius's religious policies were dangerously divisive or a sincere attempt to bridge the empire's spiritual divides. Either way, he didn't solve the issue. He just added new layers of polite resentment. But you're drifting now. The scent of incense is fading. The war drums have stopped. And in the corner of your vision, you see the empire not fractured, but tired, like a candle that burns low but still burns clean. Anastasius grows older. His policies are sound, his rules stable. But the whispers return. Who comes next? Who will inherit this vast, fragile, over-organized machine? The answer is a man named Justin. But don't worry, we'll get there soon. For now, rest your feet on the marble floor of the great palace and listen to the quiet scratch of a monk emperor signing yet another decree. Unaware that the world is already preparing to move on, you blink, and now you're in the year 518. Emperor Anastasius, with his finely manicured budget and divinely disputed doctrines, has finally done the one thing all emperors must do. He dies. Quietly. No assassins. No dramatic collapse mid-speech. No mysterious poison. Just old age, and perhaps a sense of relief that he doesn't have to referee any more theological fistfights. You might even whisper, "Well played. Eyebrows." But now the throne is empty. The empire holds its breath. And here you are again, standing at the edge of another imperial succession. Except this time, the one who grabs the purple robes isn't a patrician, isn't a general of grand renown, and certainly isn't a theologian. No, this time, it's a man who started life as a swineherd in a remote peasant village in Dardania. Meet Justin, the accidental emperor. Picture this, an old soldier with weathered hands and little schooling, dragged into the high-stakes game of politics by pure momentum. Justin had risen through the ranks of the military, not because he was flashy, but because he was solid, loyal, tough, good with logistics, and blessed with the uncanny ability to not die in a world where that's really saying something. So how does a former pig herder become ruler of the Eastern Roman Empire? Well, you know the classic story, come to Constantinople with nothing but the clothes on your back. Join the excubitors, the imperial bodyguard. Work your way up, and suddenly, your comrades are pushing you forward as emperor. Okay, maybe it's not that classic. Historians still argue whether Justin truly orchestrated his rise, or whether he was a convenient compromise candidate, pushed to the front by a faction that couldn't agree on anyone flashier. Either way, the Senate agrees, the Patriarch blesses it, and the people nod. Sure, why not? But Justin knows his limitations. He's got experience. Yes, but policy and diplomacy aren't exactly his strong suits. So he turns to someone close, someone sharp. His nephew. You feel the tension rise here. Because this isn't just any nephew. This is Flavius Petrus Sabatius. Or, as you'll come to know him, Justinian. You're watching history hinge on a family bond now. Justin adopts his nephew formally, changes his name to match, and starts grooming him for power. It's like watching a torch pass in slow motion, flickering but not yet set aflame. Young Justinian isn't just clever, he's brilliant. He's the sort of man who can argue a theological point while balancing a state budget and commissioning a cathedral blueprint on the side. And he's already moving pieces on the board before he's even emperor. Now, while Justin still breathes, the empire is already changing shape. You're wandering through the halls of power, hearing murmurs of new policies, stricte religieuse définition, and one massive pivot toward restoring Orthodox supremacy over the religious patchwork that Anastasius had delicately kept stitched together. Justin takes a hard stance, enforcing Chalcedonian orthodoxy with the subtlety of a battering ram. Monophysite bishops are out, discord is in, and yet, the empire doesn't fall apart. Why? Because Justin has something rare. Among emperors trust in someone better than himself, and Justinian is there at every step, orchestrating behind the scenes, learning, planning. You can feel the weight of coming ambition in every scroll delivered to the palace, in every marble floor, echoing with reform. Meanwhile, Justin focuses on stability. He strengthens alliances, especially with the Pope in Rome, setting the stage for a future in which Constantinople and the Latin West might cooperate again. That'll age like milk, but we'll get there. And then, in 527, Justin dies. No coup, no revolt, no divine lightning strike, just a transfer of power that, for once, feels calm. You feel the shift. The empire exhales. The last emperor of humble birth is gone. And now Justinian rises. This is the moment the Eastern Roman Empire sharpens its claws again. The last few decades have been about survival, about not tripping over your own civil wars and theological disagreements. But Justinian isn't here to survive. He's here to conquer. But before we charge into the campaigns and the crumbling ruins of the West, before generals draw maps in sand and walls crumble beneath catapults, you need to know one thing. Justinian is more than just a name on a coin. He's a force. So prepare yourself, because the ride gets steeper from here, and the shadows of Rome are about to flicker back to life. You stand quietly now, on the threshold of an empire about to explode outward. The corridors of Constantinople no longer echo just with Latin murmurs and Greek hymns, but with the clack of law codifiers, the scribble of architects, and the hush of strategists, whispering of distant lands. Justinian has taken the throne, and you're swept up in a tide of ambition that smells faintly of incense, old parchment, and wet marble. Let's not sugarcoat it. Justinian is a control freak. The kind who rearranges city planning in his head during lunch, who debates bishops on Sunday and reorganizes the tax code on Monday. And while his enemies may mock his unending energy, his eye bags, and the way he sometimes forgets to blink, Justinian knows exactly what he wants: the restoration of the Roman Empire in its full former glory. And for that, he needs a sword. Enter Belisarius. Imagine a young man tall, grim-eyed, modest in speech, sharp as obsidian, raised near the Balkans, trained in war, fluent in the awkward political ballet of imperial service. He's loyal to Justinian, devoted to his wife Antonina, who we'll meet soon, and quietly building a reputation as the kind of guy who wins battles that should be unwinnable. Historians still argue whether Belisarius rose because of his talent or because Justinian spotted a pliable loyalist. What matters to you is that this pairing, Justinian and Belisarius, is going to shape the next 2 decades, like a potter slapping clay on a wheel. It begins, unsurprisingly, in Persia. You're whisked off to the eastern front, those dry, dusty stretches along the Sasanian border, where diplomacy dies of thirst and military maneuvers depend on camel mood swings. In 527, just before Justinian formally takes the throne, Belisarius is already commanding troops under Emperor Justin, fighting the Persians in a skirmish that feels like a half-hearted brawl in a tavern before the real fight breaks out. The real fight is Dara. By 530, you're standing outside the walls of a fortress city where everything is about to go right for once. Dara is gleaming under the Anatolian sun, braced for siege. The Persian general, Mir Mirchoe, leads a force twice the size of Belisarius's army. Conventional logic says, retreat. Belisarius says no. Instead, he digs trenches, not metaphorically actual trenches, zigzagging like a child's drawing across the field. He places cavalry on the wings, his infantry in a tightly packed wall, and prepares a surprise maneuver that makes his enemies blink and you cheer silently. The Persians charge. The ground shakes. Dust clouds obscure the sun, and then counterattack. The Byzantines hold, pivot, and push. Belisarius has done it. The Persians withdraw. Dara is saved. And just like that, the name Belisarius enters the imperial fan club. But not everything glitters. A year later, at Callinicum, eyes less lucky. It's a near disaster. Fought on Easter, no less a holiday scheduling conflict that even modern HR departments would balk at. The Byzantines retreat under pressure, and Belisarius always, the Stoic, asks to be relieved of command. Justinian says no. You suspect the emperor knows that greatness isn't built on one victory alone. Back in Constantinople, the crowds are still chewing on Belisarius's name, spitting out theories like sunflower seeds. Some say he's too young, others say he's a genius. And quietly, behind heavy doors, Justinian starts sharpening a larger plan. You hear whispers of it already: Western reconquest, Africa, Italy, the works. But first, there's a city to hold. Constantinople is glittering, overpopulated, and, as you'll soon see, ready to explode. For now, though, you're left with the image of Belisarius dismounting outside the city gates. He's a man who has fought Persians, survived political infighting, and come out with both ears still attached. He's no firebrand. He doesn't shout, but there's something in the way he moves, deliberate, steady, That makes you wonder what this man might do with a full imperial army at his back. You'll find out soon. You barely have time to blink before Constantinople turns from a jewel of civilization into a pressure cooker of rage. You stroll through its marbled streets, dodging vendors, hawking figs and bureaucrats, whining about grain imports. But something is off. Tension buzzes in the air like a harp string pulled too tight. The factions are no longer just sports clubs. They're armies in robes. The blue and the green, originally teams in the city's beloved chariot races, have morphed into political monsters, each representing deeper rifts in Byzantine society. You know it's bad when people start wearing team colors to commit murder. Then, the 5th of January 32, the week your nap schedule dies, the week Constantinople loses its mind. It starts with executions. The blues and greens riot when 2 of their members are sentenced to death. The emperor's response: classic, overkill. He tries to pacify them with another chariot race. If that sounds like trying to douse a bonfire with a soda cup, you're absolutely right. During the next event at the Hippodrome, chants erupt not for victory, but for blood. Nika, they scream. Conquer it becomes the soundtrack of a city falling apart. For days, the mob controls the streets. They torch buildings. They sack homes. The Hagia Sophia, a symbol of divine grandeur, goes up in flames. It's like a badly directed historical epic, only it's very, very real. And you're in it, choking on ash and tripping over bricks. Justinian hides in the palace. His advisors whisper escape plans. His face is drawn, pupal, twitching like a wax figure in a sauna. Most emperors would have bolted by now, horse hooves already clattering toward the docks. But then Theodora speaks. Purple makes a fine burial shroud. She says, "It's the kind of line that freezes everyone, including you. This is no empress, draped in pearls and perfumed dreams. This is the steel-spine survivor of Constantinople's underworld. The woman who clawed her way into the palace and isn't about to lose it to hooligans with torches. And in this mess, Belisarius returns. He isn't wearing armor. Not yet. Just the calm of a man used to chaos. Justinian summons him, along with Mundus, another general of less poetic reputation. Belisarius is tasked with putting the riot down. That sounds simple until you realize they're outnumbered by at least 10 to 1. The rioters have clogged the Hippodrome, their chants echoing like war drums. Belisarius doesn't hesitate. He marches into the Hippodrome with a hand-picked group of loyal soldiers. The blues and greens think they've won. They're still bickering about who the next emperor should be when the slaughter begins. It's brutal, bloody, unforgiving. Over 30,000 people, in a single afternoon. Not in battlefields, but in the stone seats of a sporting arena. You probably won't survive this part. Not emotionally anyway. And still there's an eerie silence afterward. A city drained of fury. A people broken, shocked, blinking at the soot where their churches used to be. The streets, once red with flame, now stink of wet stone and smoke. Bodies are carted off in wheelbarrows. Survivors wander like ghosts. And yet, the empire holds. Historians still argue whether this was a necessary purge or a tyrant's tantrum. Was Justinian's survival worth the cost? Did Belisarius act as a hero or butcher? What's certain is that this moment cements Belisarius in the emperor's inner circle, no longer just a general, but a savior of the regime. And the rebuilding begins. Justinian, now secure in power, doesn't just patch up the mess. He commissions greatness. He rebuilds the Hagia Sophia on a scale so grand, it'll make your jaw click open. It becomes the largest cathedral in the world for nearly 1,000 years. Floating above Constantinople, like a stone cloud of holiness. You wander through it once, its complete light, filtering through golden mosaics. The dome seemingly suspended from heaven, by divine thread. It's a monument not just to God, but to survival, to the grit of an empire that just won't die quietly. And beside Justinian stands Belisarius, the man who held the sword when the empire cracked, the man who now waits patiently for his next command. And oh, it's coming, because across the sea, another empire festers. Africa, the Vandal kingdom. And if you think things have been wild so far, you're not remotely prepared for what comes next. The salty breeze brushes your face as you stand on the deck of a Byzantine warship. Its sails straining toward Africa. The water beneath you shimmers deceptively calm, as if the sea itself is politely pretending not to know you're about to launch one of the most ambitious military campaigns in the Empire's history. Welcome to 533, where you well. Technically, Belisarius are about to take on the Vandals. Now, if you're thinking Vandals, like the graffiti guys, not quite. These Vandals are a Germanic tribe that once marched through Roman territory like kids on a sugar high. They sacked Rome in 455, an event that made Western aristocrats spit out their imported wine. Then they set up shop in North Africa, turning Carthage into their capital and dominating the Western Mediterranean like it was their personal bathtub. Justinian, still glowing with post-riot confidence, and maybe a hint of vengeance sparkle. I want the West back. Not a little back. All the way back. Italy. Spain. Africa. It's a nostalgia-fueled crusade. And Belisarius, fresh from slaughtering rioters and polishing his spotless resume, is the man he picks to start with Carthage. You glance at your fleet, 500 ships, give or take. The logistics alone are enough to give your tax collectors a migraine, feeding this many soldiers. Sailors, horses, and let's be honest, parasites is a nightmare. One wrong calculation, and the army dies before it even sees battle. But Belisarius, cool, as ever. He doesn't just rely on numbers. He brings along Antonina, yes, Theodora's bestie, and his wife, and a compact, elite army, veterans, disciplined, and painfully aware that messing up in Africa might mean exile or execution. You'd call it a vacation, if not for the flaming arrows and malaria. The voyage is surprisingly smooth, though the sailors mutter about sea monsters and divine punishment. You mostly ignore them until the fleet pulls into the African coast near Cape Verde. You step onto land, crunching dry under your sandals, staring into a country that's been Vandal for 100 years. And here's where it gets juicy. The Vandal king, Galima, is supremely unconcerned. He's distracted by his own family drama, his cousin Hilderic, more pro-Roman than he should be, is under arrest, and Galima's busy planning his long, slow, messy execution, because nothing says stable regime like imprisoning your relatives. Belisarius wastes no time. He wins the locals over with restraint, politeness, and a shocking lack of pillaging. Historians still argue whether this was intentional or just a fluke. But either way, it works. The North African cities start whispering, maybe these Byzantines aren't so bad. Then comes the Battle of Ad Decimum. You trudge with the army under a sky that feels too bright for what's coming. Belisarius knows he's outnumbered, but he also knows something the Vandals don't: how to coordinate a complex ambush while keeping calm enough to sip watered wine. Gelimer, for all his royal swagger, makes a series of unfortunate choices, like splitting his forces and pausing the battle to bury his brother. Yes, you heard that right. In the middle of chaos, he stops to hold a funeral. It's either deeply poetic or strategically catastrophic. And you're in the thick of it. The fighting is messy, not Hollywood. Slow motion swordplay. It's confusion, dust, yelling, stabbing at shapes that might be friends or foes. Belisarius rides through it all, like he's guiding a chariot through traffic, rallying troops, barking orders, and somehow not dying. The result: victory, a real one. The Vandals scatter. Gelimer flees into the mountains. Carthage, stunned and suspicious, surrenders without a scratch. You march in with the soldiers, half expecting a trap, but instead find wine cellars, mosaics, and a populace already dusting off their Roman togas. But don't relax just yet. Carthage isn't a prize, it's bait. A city taken is a city to be retaken. And Gelimer isn't done just because he ran off with a few bodyguards and an existential crisis. He's regrouping. And you, Belisarius, know the hardest part of the campaign is yet to come. Still, for now, you breathe. You walk Carthage's avenues, past temples converted into stables and fountains overrun with reeds. You find a rooftop and stare at the sea. It's quiet, suspiciously so, and in your gut, you feel it. The Vandals will return, but next time, they'll be angry. You stand at the gates of Carthage, feeling the weight of your small but victorious army settling into this once grand city that now looks like a washed-out postcard of a forgotten empire. The sun is hot enough to fry an egg on the marble, and your boots kick up dust that seems to carry the ghosts of Roman triumphs past. Belisarius has done the impossible. He's taken the Vandal capital without turning it into a smoking ruin. Your job, make sure it stays that way. But peace in a city recently wrested from barbarians is as stable as a toddler on a sugar rush. The locals eye you with a mix of hope and suspicion, while former Vandal supporters are simmering, plotting somewhere in the shadows. You move carefully, setting up governance with a firm but fair hand, reminding yourself that history is often written not on the battlefield, but in the quiet council chambers. Meanwhile, Gelimer is far from finished. Rumors swirl that he's rallied fresh forces in Numidia, scouring the hills for loyal warriors and mercenaries to reclaim his lost kingdom. Historians still argue whether his delay was tactical or simply because he had no idea what to do with his cousin's corpse. Yes, that funeral debacle continues to perplex scholars. As you stroll through Carthage's market, the scent of spices mingles with the briny sea air. You overhear merchants swapping stories about Belisarius's reputation. Some call him a miracle. Others, a cunning opportunist. Your mind drifts to Antonina, Belisarius' wife, whose presence here is as much a morale boost as a political statement. She's rumored to be the real power behind the throne, steering her husband's decisions with a quiet but iron will. You make a mental note to avoid underestimating her. Night falls, and with it comes the eerie silence of a city holding its breath. Lanterns flicker along narrow streets, casting long shadows where spies might lurk. You can almost taste the tension thick enough to chew. The next move is prepare for Gelimer's counterattack. Reinforce the walls, train the troops, and pray that this fragile peace doesn't shatter like thin glass. Because the Vandals don't forgive, They don't forget, and they certainly don't give up. You wake up to the clatter of armor and the sharp scent of salt and sweat mixing in the morning air. Belisarius' army is restless. Tension, crackling louder than the seagulls overhead. Gelimer's forces are gathering somewhere beyond the horizon. Their battle flags, snapping like thunderclouds, waiting to burst. The uneasy calm of Carthage has turned into a simmering pot on the verge of boiling over. Belisarius moves through the ranks like a calm storm, checking formations and whispering orders with a confidence that belies the precariousness of the situation. You, standing among the soldiers, feel his presence like a steady anchor amid the chaos. He's not just a general, he's the heart of this campaign, a man who knows how to turn fear into focus. The Vandals aren't just angry, they're desperate. Their kingdom is slipping through their fingers like sand. And Gelimer knows this battle will decide everything. He's no fool. But historians still argue whether his strategy to lure Belisarius into a trap near Trichomarum was brilliant, or just plain reckless. The clash comes fast and brutal. Dust rises like smoke from a furnace, as swords clash and shields splinter. You get knocked sideways more than once, tasting grit and blood, wondering if your ancestors ever dreamed you'd be fighting barbarians in North Africa under Byzantine banners. Amid the chaos, Belisarius rides like a lion, directing his troops with shouts, barely audible over the roar. You catch a glimpse of Antonina, not far behind, rallying the medics and soothing the wounded. It's a strange comfort, like having a lighthouse in the storm. After hours that feel like days, the tide turns. Gelimer's forces falter, their lines breaking under the disciplined weight of Byzantine soldiers. You watch as their king, face grim and defeated, turns tail and disappears into the hills. Victory tastes sweet but bittersweet. Knowing this war has drained more than just armies, it's bled the soul of a continent. The road ahead is uncertain, and the ghosts of past empires whisper warnings. Yet here you stand, at the edge of history, witnessing a chapter that might just rewrite the future. The aftermath of the battle feels surreal. You trudge through the quiet ruins where yesterday's screams have been replaced by an uneasy silence. Carthage breathes, a tentative sigh of relief. But you know better than to trust a city just freed from war. The air still tastes of smoke and sweat, and every step stirs up memories of clashing swords and shattered shields. Belisarius, ever the strategist, begins the delicate work of rebuilding alliances. He meets with local leaders, some wary, some openly hostile, others simply exhausted by decades of Vandal rule and Byzantine neglect. You overhear whispers that the Vandals left behind strange artifacts in their hurry, rumors of cursed treasures or secret tunnels. Scholars still debate whether these stories have any truth or are just fanciful tales born from fear. Your own role shifts from warrior to diplomat, navigating the intricate dance of power and persuasion. You realize the art of war isn't just about fighting, it's about knowing when to hold your tongue and when to strike a deal. Meanwhile, Antonina's influence in court politics grows. Some call her the puppet master, others the savior of Byzantium's African ambitions. The city slowly wakes up, markets reopening, children cautiously playing in the streets, while Byzantine soldiers keep watch like silent shadows. But the real challenge lies ahead, securing the loyalty of the newly conquered and guarding against the inevitable Vandal resurgence. In these moments, you understand that history isn't just written by generals and kings. It's shaped by those who survive, adapt, and endure in the cracks of empires. And you, whether you like it or not, are part of that story. You find yourself walking along the battered walls of Carthage. The city now a patchwork of old Roman stones and hastily repaired Byzantine fortifications. The Mediterranean breeze carries the salty promise of more battles to come, but also the faint scent of blooming oleanders, a small reminder that life insists on continuing, despite war. Your senses pick up on the subtle shifts, the wary glances of the local Berber tribesmen, the anxious conversations in the taverns where Byzantine soldiers and native merchants exchange uneasy jokes. Belisarius' fleet, once just a smattering of ships, begins to swell with reinforcements arriving from Constantinople. The sea itself seems to hum with anticipation, a watery stage for the next act in this long drama. But sailors whisper about strange omens, storms that seem to arrive without warning, and unexplainable sightings of glowing lights beneath the waves. Historians still argue whether these maritime legends were coded warnings, or just sailors' tales amplified by superstition. Meanwhile, your mind drifts to Flavius Basiliscus, the naval commander tasked with securing these waters. His reputation for daring raids against the Vandals precedes him, though some question his true motives. Was he merely a loyal servant of Justinian, or did he harbor ambitions as vast as the sea itself? You notice how Basiliscus moves through the fleet with the ease of a fish in water, commanding respect and suspicion in equal measure. As the sun dips low, casting golden hues over the rippling waves, you brace yourself for the upcoming naval campaign. The Vandal navy may have been weakened, but the war is far from over, and every ship could mean the difference between survival and oblivion. The morning fog clings to the docks as you step aboard the flagship, the creak of wood and the salty tang of sea spray filling your lungs. Flavius Basiliscus stands at the helm, a figure both commanding and enigmatic, his eyes scanning the horizon like a predator, sizing up its prey. The fleet is a motley collection of galleys and transports, each vessel bristling with soldiers and sailors, ready to challenge the Vandals on their own watery turf. As the ships pull away from Carthage, the rhythmic slap of oars against the waves becomes a steady heartbeat. You can almost taste the tension, a mix of excitement and dread, as the fleet heads toward the Vandal stronghold of Sicily. Basiliscus's strategy is bold instead of a direct assault. He plans a series of lightning raids, hitting key ports and supply lines to cripple the enemy's ability to wage war. You overhear sailors swapping stories about Basiliscus' earlier exploit, including a curious tale of how he once used flaming pigs to scatter enemy ships, a tactic so bizarre it sounds like something out of a comedy sketch. Yet it apparently worked. Historians still argue whether this story was a clever psychological ploy or an exaggerated myth born from battlefield chaos. As the coastline of Sicily looms ahead, the sun rises higher, casting long shadows over the waves. You steady yourself, knowing that the coming days will test your resolve in ways you've never imagined. The sea is unpredictable, much like war itself, and only those who can navigate its treacherous waters will survive. The salty wind bites sharper as the fleet nears the Vandal-held harbors. The cries of gulls, mingling with the clatter of armor and the distant murmur of enemy sentries. You stand on the deck, heart pounding, feeling the tension coil tighter with every wave. Basiliscus moves like a shadow among his men, calm and calculating, issuing orders that ripple through the crew like a silent storm. The first raid is swift and brutal, a lightning strike that catches the Vandals off guard. Fires bloom along the docks, smoke curling into the sky as the Byzantines seize supply ships and destroy critical infrastructure. The chaos is thick and disorienting. You barely have time to catch your breath between clashes. Yet, amid the fury, you notice Basiliscus's unusual restraint. He spares civilians and historical monuments. A rare mercy in such a ruthless war. Whispers among the sailors speak of Basiliscus's rumored pact with local pirates, a shadowy alliance that some swear tipped the scales in Byzantium's favor. Historians still debate whether these whispers hold any truth or are just the desperate fabrications of defeated foes. As night falls, you watch the flickering fires from a distance, knowing this is only the beginning. The Vandals will retaliate, and the sea will become a deadly chessboard where every move counts. You wonder how long your luck will hold out, and if you'll live to see the final act of this turbulent campaign. The dawn brings a fragile calm. The smoky remnants of last night's fires, painting the sky in shades of orange and grey. You trudge along the battered coastline, the sand still warm beneath your feet. The scent of salt and charred wood hanging heavy in the air. The fleet rests, but the tension never really fades. You can almost taste it, like copper on your tongue. Basiliscus convenes with his officers, poring over maps marked with scribbles and hastily drawn arrows. His plan is audacious. Rather than chase the Vandals into pitched battle, he aims to isolate their naval forces and cut off their reinforcements from the sea. It's a strategy that requires patience, precision, and a touch of luck. You admire his ability to balance boldness with caution, though some in the fleet grumble about the slow pace. Meanwhile, rumors swirl about Basiliscus's upbringing. Some say he was a commoner who clawed his way to power. Others, that he hailed from a noble family with tangled ties to the imperial court. Historians still argue whether his charisma or cunning played a bigger role in his rise. Whatever the truth, his presence commands loyalty and fear in equal measure. As you prepare for the next phase, you catch a glimpse of the local populous fishermen, traders, and children watching from a distance. They seem both hopeful and wary, caught in the crossfire of empires. You remind yourself that war is never just about armies. It's about people, and the fragile threads that bind them together. The sun beats down mercilessly as the fleet slips quietly into a narrow inlet, hidden from the prying eyes of the Vandal scouts. You lean over the rail, the water below, shimmering with the occasional darting fish, and wonder how many secrets the sea keeps buried beneath its waves. Basiliscus moves like a chess grandmaster, positioning his forces with calculated patience, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The tension among the crew is palpable, but beneath it lies a strange camaraderie. Jokes about the dangers ahead mingle with tales of past glories. You hear a sailor joking that if the Vandals attack, they'll probably have to fight off Basiliscus's legendary flaming pigs tactic again. Historians still argue whether such theatrical methods were common or simply colorful exaggerations passed down through generations. As night falls, the fleet prepares for an ambush. The oars dipping silently into the dark water, you feel a shiver of anticipation and something like dread. The sea is a fickle ally, and one wrong move could mean disaster. Basiliscus's voice cuts through the night, calm and steady, reminding everyone that victory favors the bold, but punishes the reckless. You settle in to wait, the distant stars mirrored in the still waters, your thoughts drifting to the uncertain future of this naval campaign. Somewhere out there, the Vandals are plotting their counterattack, and you know the next few hours will decide much more than just territory. The silence of the night shatters as the Vandal fleet appears on the horizon, their ships silhouetted against the faint glow of dawn. Your pulse quickens, each heartbeat echoing in your ears like a war drum. Basiliscus barks orders with a calm urgency, his voice steady, despite the chaos about to unfold. You grip the railing tightly, the wood rough beneath your fingers, as the clash of oars against water crescendos into the brutal symphony of battle. The Byzantines spring their trap, arrows raining down and flaming projectiles lighting the sky. Ships collide, splintering wood and shouting men, creating a chaos so vivid you can almost taste the salt and smoke mingling in the air. Yet, amidst the carnage, Basiliscus's leadership shines. His tactics are precise, turning the tide in favor of your fleet. It's a masterclass in naval warfare, and you can't help but marvel at the sheer audacity. There's a curious anecdote floating among the ranks that Basiliscus once used underwater divers, early scuba pioneers, if you will, to sabotage enemy ships. Historians still argue whether this was fact or fanciful legend, but the idea alone speaks volumes about his innovative mind. As the battle wanes, you find yourself drenched and exhausted, but victorious. The sea, once calm and mysterious, now roils with the detritus of war. You glance at Basiliscus, whose face remains unreadable, a reminder that in war, even victory carries its own burdens. The morning after the battle, you trudge through the wreckage-strewn harbor, the air thick with the acrid smell of burnt wood and spilled oil. Basiliscus moves among the men, inspecting the damage with a keen eye, already plotting the next move. His ability to remain focused, despite the chaos, is unnerving, but you're starting to understand that this is what makes him a great leader. Among the spoils, you find curious relics, Vandal banners, emblazoned with strange symbols, some depicting sea creatures that seem more myth than reality. Some sailors joke that the Vandals worshipped sea monsters, but historians still argue whether this was genuine religious iconography or clever propaganda meant to intimidate foes. Back aboard your ship, the tension is bittersweet. There's a sense of triumph, but also a growing unease about what lies ahead. Basiliscus's campaign has pushed the Vandals back, but their resilience is legendary. You overhear whispered debates about whether this conflict will end soon or drag on into a protracted struggle, draining resources and morale. As the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the deck, you catch your reflection in the water, tired, but alive. The war is far from over, and the sea holds many secrets yet. You wonder how much longer your luck will last. The campaign shifts as Basiliscus orders a daring assault on the fortified island stronghold, where the Vandals have regrouped. You find yourself navigating treacherous waters, the ship's prow slicing through waves that crash like thunder against jagged rocks. The salty spray stings your face, mixing with the sweat from the oppressive heat. Basiliscus's steely gaze never wavers as he directs the fleet, coordinating a complex dance of attack and defense. The Vandals respond fiercely, their archers raining arrows from atop the walls, and you notice their unique tactic of using flaming barrels rolled downhill, a terrifying sight that sets parts of the island ablaze. Yet Basiliscus counters with an equally unexpected move, deploying smoke screens to blind the enemy, a tactic that some historians credit as an early form of naval guerrilla warfare. Amid the chaos, you hear whispers among the troops about Basiliscus's rumored habit of sleeping in a tent surrounded by exotic animals, monkeys, peacocks, and even a pair of falcons, an eccentricity that seems at odds with his military precision. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine practice or a myth cultivated to enhance his mystique. As the battle rages, you feel the weight of history pressing down. knowing that these moments could tip the balance of power in the Mediterranean for years to come. The island falls after a grueling siege, and you step ashore amidst the smoke and rubble, the acrid scent lingering in your nostrils. The once proud fortress is now a smouldering ruin, echoing with the distant cries of wounded men and the creaking of damaged ships. Basiliscus strides confidently through the chaos, rallying his troops with a mix of stern commands and rare words of encouragement. In the aftermath, you discover caches of stolen goods, silks, spices, and intricate jewelry that hint at the wealth the Vandals had plundered during their reign. It's a reminder that this war isn't just about land or power, it's about control of trade routes and the flow of riches across the sea. Some sailors joke that if you ever wanted to start a medieval thrift shop, now would be the time. There's also an odd relic you stumble upon, a tiny statue carved from ivory, depicting a mermaid-like figure with a mischievous grin. Historians still argue whether such symbols were meant to protect sailors or curse their enemies, adding a layer of mysticism to the brutal reality of war. As night falls, you find yourself contemplating the cost of victory, the lives lost, the homes destroyed, and the uncertain future that awaits both conquerors and conquered. The victorious fleet sets sail once more, but the mood aboard is tempered by the harsh realities of extended warfare. You watch Basiliscus from the quarterdeck, his expression unreadable as he pores over maps and dispatches by lantern light. The cool sea breeze offers little relief from the simmering tensions and whispered fears among the crew. You hear murmurs about how prolonged campaigns wear down even the toughest soldiers, and the same applies to commanders. One sailor shares a curious tale about Basiliscus, reportedly using a secret code based on bird calls to relay messages during battle, an early form of military cryptography that still puzzles historians. Whether true or not, it highlights the innovative mind of the man who commands you. As you navigate toward the next target, debates erupt among the officers about the strategic merits of a naval blockade versus direct assault. Historians still argue whether Basiliscus favored bold strikes or more cautious, attritional tactics. But one thing's certain, his decisions often walked a fine line between genius and recklessness. You lean back, letting the rhythmic creak of the ship soothe your frayed nerves, wondering how much longer this dance of war will last and what price will finally be paid. The fleet arrives near the Vandal capital, a bustling port city alive with tension and wary eyes. You stand on deck, the salty air mixed with distant smoke, and watch Basiliscus plan his assault with surgical precision. The anticipation in the air is thick, and you can almost taste the anxiety mingled with hope among the sailors. Stories circulate about the Vandals' use of wild beasts, perhaps lions or bears kept in cages as a deterrent or a psychological weapon. Historians still argue whether these tales are exaggerations or grounded in reality, but they add a fierce mystique to the enemy you face. As the siege begins, Basiliscus' naval skills come into play, orchestrating supply lines and cutting off reinforcements. The battle tests your endurance and faith, as each day brings new challenges and the weight of countless lives hanging in the balance. You wonder whether the glory of victory will outweigh the sacrifices demanded. Days bleed into nights as the siege tightens its grip. You trudge through the relentless grind of camp life, the mingled scents of salt, sweat, and smoke a constant companion. Basiliscus remains a constant figure of control, pacing the camp and issuing orders with unwavering focus. His voice cuts through the murmur of weary soldiers like a lighthouse beam in fog. Among whispered rumors, you hear a tale that Basiliscus once survived an assassination attempt by hiding in a barrel of fish, an odd and smelly refuge that's become a legendary anecdote among the men. Historians still argue whether this story is fact or clever exaggeration, meant to boost morale. Tactical debates flare up among the officers, particularly over whether to storm the city gates or starve the defenders into submission. Historians still argue whether this was a prolonged siege or a series of rapid assaults. But Basiliscus's adaptability proves crucial as the campaign grinds on. Your muscles ash, but you push forward, driven by a mix of duty and a faint hope for home. The city's walls finally crumble after a fierce assault, and you enter, alongside Basiliscus, into the smoldering streets, where the air is thick with dust and tension. The once vibrant markets lie deserted, the silence broken only by the distant cries of the defeated. You feel the weight of the moment, a victory hard won, but shadowed by destruction. Among the spoils, you spot a collection of Vandal war drums, intricately carved and surprisingly well preserved. Some historians suggest these drums held ritual significance, while others argue they were merely tools of communication during battle, a debate that colors the way you view the cultural complexity of your foes. As the city falls under your control, you reflect on the fleeting nature of power and the brutal cost of conquest. Basiliscus, ever the pragmatist, begins organizing the rebuilding efforts. But you know peace is often just the calm before another storm. With the Vandal stronghold subdued, Basiliscus turns his attention to securing the surrounding territories. Knowing well that conquest is only half the battle, you ride alongside him through ruined villages and contested lands, witnessing firsthand the fragile balance between military order and civil unrest. The sun beats down relentlessly, and the dust coats your skin like a gritty cloak. A curious detail surfaces among the locals. Some claim that Basiliscus carried a small talisman said to protect him from shipwreck and betrayal, a superstition that contrasts with his otherwise pragmatic demeanor. Historians still argue whether such artifacts influenced leaders or simply reflected popular beliefs of the time. You observe Basiliscus negotiating with local leaders, balancing diplomacy and intimidation in equal measure, understanding that lasting control requires more than just swords and spears. As the campaign extends, you realize that the sea isn't the only battlefield. Winning hearts and minds is a war of its own. The campaign's momentum carries you deeper into territories where the sea meets untamed landscapes. Basiliscus commands not just fleets, but armies that traverse rugged coasts and dense forests. The salty breeze mingles with the earthy scent of pine and damp stone as you march, muscles burning but spirits steady. Among the soldiers, stories abound about Basiliscus's uncanny ability to predict storms, a skill attributed to his keen observation, or perhaps whispered secrets passed down from older sailors. Historians still argue whether such weather foresight was luck or learned expertise, but it certainly gave his forces an edge in naval battles. In these wild borderlands, you witness the challenges of supply lines stretched thin and local populations caught between empires. The lines between friend and foe blur, and Basiliscus's leadership is tested not only by enemies, but by the precarious loyalties of those he seeks to control. You brace yourself for whatever comes next, knowing the sea's call is never truly silenced. Storm clouds gather as your fleet prepares for another naval engagement. You stand at the prow, feeling the cold spray of the sea, the tension among the crew almost palpable. Basiliscus moves among them, steadying nerves with his calm presence and sharp orders. The horizon holds the enemy ships, dark shapes waiting in silent menace. An odd anecdote circulates that Basiliscus once used flaming pigs as a form of psychological warfare, a tactic meant to scare enemy animals and troops alike. An inventive, if messy, strategy that historians still debate for its effectiveness or outright myth. As the battle unfolds, you see the blend of strategy and chaos that defines naval warfare. Basiliscus's decisions pivot swiftly, adapting to shifting winds and enemy maneuvers. Historians still argue whether his greatest strength lay in his daring or his discipline, but you know this clash will leave a mark on all involved, whether victors or vanquished. The aftermath of battle leaves the sea strewn with wreckage and the air thick with salt and smoke. You row among shattered ships, the groans of injured men and creaking timbers, a grim symphony. Basiliscus moves through the carnage with grim determination, ensuring survivors are tended and the fleet reorganized. A peculiar tale from this fight tells of a commander who supposedly sent a message sealed in a fish's belly, a message so secret it swam right past enemy lines. Historians still argue whether this was a clever communication tactic or a sailor's tall tale passed down through generations. With the enemy fleet weakened, Basiliscus pressed forward, his focus sharp, despite the toll. You notice the toll on the men's faces and wonder how much longer the human spirit can endure the relentless cycle of war and waiting. Victory tastes sweet, but it's laced with the bitterness of loss. As the campaign draws to its climax, Basiliscus orchestrates a final push to secure lasting control over the region. You trudge alongside him, the weight of months pressing on your shoulders, the scent of sea and smoke a constant companion. The victories have been hard fought, but the road ahead remains uncertain and winding. An intriguing note among the chronicles suggests Basiliscus may have secretly harbored ambitions far beyond his naval command, possibly even the throne itself, a notion that sparks lively debate among historians. Some seeing it as political paranoia, others as a plausible power play. In these final moments, you feel the gravity of history unfolding beneath your feet, the tides of empire and ambition swirling around you. As Basiliscus gazes out over the horizon, you realize that the sea's whispers will carry the echoes of this campaign long after the last ship has sailed.